welcome to our final day's program from the Science of Consciousness Conference 2017 here in San Diego. We have a great show for you today to close. Our guests are Sir Roger Penrose, James Tagg, who is the founder of the Penrose Institute, and Elaine, who is a musician and neuroscientist researcher from London. Two very interesting interviews, and we'll just go roving around the conference in the last closing hours and see what else is going on. Welcome.
In this conference, we've talked about everything there is to talk about. It's pretty good. It's well-rounded.
I think it was a perfect balance for me. We had science, a little bit of philosophical digression.
It's a unique conference, and it's a blend of different disciplines. And I think that's it's a good mix.
So I would like now to welcome to Consciousness Central, welcome back Sir Roger Penrose, coming from the UK, and with him today is James Tagg. James has been part of the initiative to begin the Penrose Institute, which will be located simultaneously in San Diego, California, and I believe in the UK. James, could you tell us something about this initiative?
Yes, so I've been fascinated with Roger's work for many years. I, like many people, read The Emperor's New Mind probably some 30 years ago now, which suggested that the human mind was not just a sort of a deterministic computer, but was something more clever. And I thought it would be very interesting to start to do some research and on those ideas. And then I got talking to a doctor at UCSD called Eric Veary, and we thought, well, why just some research? Why not an institute? And so we had this idea that we'd do an institute, and then we happened to bump into Stuart Hammeroff and explained that we were trying to do an institute. And he said, well, why don't you call it the Penrose Institute? So we wrote to Roger and said, we have this idea to start an institute sort of in your name and looking at your ideas. And he very kindly said, that's a splendid idea, and you know, that sounds great.
Excellent. So what can you give an outline of some of the areas you want to be studying that relate, and how it relates to Roger's work?
Yeah, so there's sort of three things that come from Roger's work, from my point of view. I mean, obviously there's maybe an infinity of things that come, but there's this idea that humans are different to artificial intelligence, and that we're able to do things that computers can't do. We obviously know computers can do things that we can't do, in that they can calculate big numbers and so on, but we appear to be creative and have these facilities. The second thing, of course, is that if that's true and we have these facilities, you should be able to get inside the brain and actually work out which pieces of the brain do these things. So the first idea is you've got these computation ideas and creativity, and then the second idea is you could actually go looking, so it's sort of neurobiology. And then the third piece, of course, is that Roger proposed this piece of physics that would need to change in order to support the brain having this non-computable capability, which was that you would need some sort of modification to quantum mechanics that brought in general relativity in some way. And so it's now become possible to test some of these things. So you can actually go looking for reduction, i.e. that quantum mechanics reduces to a decision, so one cat lives or one cat dies in the Schrödinger test.
So Roger, have you been able to do any kind of practical research according to, I mean, for example, ORCO-R?
Well, I haven't done practical research. Oh, in practical you meant experiments?
Experimental, I suppose.
Certainly.
Yeah.
No, that's not been my area. But on the other hand, I felt rather strongly that with this institute, I mean, there are various ideas which are unorthodox, particularly the one to do with consciousness, I would say. And also that's based on an idea about quantum mechanics having its limits in a particular way, which is not part of conventional view of quantum mechanics. So I was afraid that people might get the idea that this was a bit of a flaky place if we weren't careful. So I thought it was important that we would be doing things which were testable experimentally, and if not, well, in reasonably near future, and perhaps not too expensive experiments. Also, the consciousness issue is only a very small part of what I directly do myself. I mean, there's the idea, which clearly is something, well, consciousness is a subject of great importance, so if one can make progress in understanding what it is and how it comes about, is certainly something well worth studying. And if there are certain approaches to that which can be tested experimentally, I think that's important. But as far as my own work has been concerned, although the quantum mechanics end of the consciousness issue has been something I've been very interested in, it's only, again, a part of the things that I think are important to study, and that we should be thinking about various issues in physics which are not directly the ones that have been just mentioned. But again, I felt, for example, things like quantum gravity, where there are many, many ideas and theories about it, most of these are completely untestable. So I was not wanting to have something like that, which would be, again, untestable. So we need things where there are experimental tests, although myself, I've not been particularly involved in experiments. So I thought, in particular, there's a lady called Yvette Fuentes, who I've known for quite a few years, and she has some extremely ingenious ideas about experiments, particularly detecting of gravitational waves, but also we talked together about how one might make experiments to detect whether the quantum state reduction that's required for the consciousness program that Stuart Hameroff and I have been trying to develop. The limits on quantum mechanics are things which could be tested. There are experiments at the moment who've been trying to look for this effect, but the idea, based on what Yvette has been doing, would be that one could use these things called Bose-Einstein condensates. That's what she's been working with for the gravitational wave detection. It's a remarkable thing what she's doing, because one knows the excitement today about the LIGO project, which seems to have detected gravitational waves from the inspiraling and swallowing up of two black holes. They spiral into each other and swallow each other up, and in the process they emit these waves, gravitational waves, so the oscillations in the gravitational field, or in space-time structure basically, and they're very, very tiny effects which have been observed just recently within the last year or so. But she has this idea that you could do it with these very, very tiny objects instead of the many kilometer long arms which they need for the conventional mechanisms. But it did seem that these ideas could be used in other ways, not just for detecting gravitational waves, but for testing the quantum state reduction thing. And also, since I was talking to her, it seemed to me there are other things one might detect. In particular, according to a scheme of mine to do with cosmology, dark matter, which is one of the great mysterious. It's the major contribution to the material content of the universe, but it's completely invisible. It seems to interact with things in no way other than gravitationally, and nobody seems to know what it is. But in the scheme I have, it has a particular, we know what it is in the context of this theory, and we also know that it should decay from time to time. And these decay products are things that probably could be detected by these same detectors. So that's another area. There are also other, well, this leads to cosmology, and there are ideas there where we might be design experiments or use devices which are already looking at signals from outer space, and use these things to get conclusions about cosmology, but also foundations of quantum mechanics and how this relates to Einstein's general theory of relativity. Also detectors, again, this is the thing that Yvette has been working with, are things where you might be able to measure the gravitational field, let's see, the curvature of space-time. One might be able to measure, in principle one certainly could, with these devices, these Bose-Einstein condensates and things like that. So it's very exciting, I think, that one has the opportunity to explore the universe in ways which it has not been explored by, as well as the things to do with the consciousness issue, which is clearly important, but the work that I've done has been much more on the pure physics side. And I think there are many things that one might... It changes the way I look at things because I've been working very theoretically and not concerning myself so much with what you might detect. And this sort of gives a different angle on these things, and so I find it very exciting to be able to look at things and see whether they're out there in a way, rather than just having ideas about mathematics and so on. So for me it's very exciting.
Let's just conclude, perhaps, if we may, by swinging back towards consciousness. And I know that, well, as we're at the consciousness conference...
No, that's a pretty reasonable thing to do.
Yes, yes.
Well,
yes.
I'm curious about how, are you going to be, how are things going with Anirban Bandyopadhyay and his work?
Yeah.
And he's looking for quantum effects in microtubules, of course, which would be, as we know, as a strong pointer for Orko-R and you and Stuart. So do you have some, I don't know, will you be continuing or expanding on what he's been doing?
Well, this might be one of the first things one would look at, because it looks rather immediate. I mean, the detection, the Bose-Einstein condensates being used in the way I've just been describing is a little way off, maybe a few years. But the easiest thing one might do is to, I mean, Stuart Hameroff is
itching to get on
because the great thing would be to you look at Anirban's experiments and see whether microtubules, how they're affected by, say, anesthetic gases, or the opposite, which are the ones that psychoactive drugs. And so the anesthetic, maybe the effects that he sees, the conductance of these microtubules, which occur, what he calls ballistic conductance, which is suddenly these things, at very specific frequencies, they become extremely conductive. And the question is whether that's inhibited or changed by, say, anesthetic gases, or the other way around, maybe with these psychoactive.
Yeah, so you have to sort of piece to get Orko-R to explain consciousness, you have to piece a bunch of things together. And one of the things that you need to get is some sort of quantum effect going on in the brain. And so Anirban thinks he has got this sort of coherent transfer of energy, or ballistic conduction, or whatever you want to call it, along neurons. And if we were able to turn that conductivity off or reduce it with anesthetics and then bring it back again, it suggests that might be something to do with consciousness, given that if I give you an anesthetic, you'll go to sleep, and if I take it away, you'll wake up. It doesn't there's a lot of things you'd have to do to make a knockout argument that everyone would accept and go, okay, it's quantum, okay, it's all of these things, but it's another piece in the puzzle, and it's a really big piece.
Well, that's the thing, because anesthetics are a clear experimental indicator of consciousness, because we know when it's there and when it's not there. And so what the anesthetic gases actually do is crucial.
And that still generally remains a mystery, is that right in saying that?
Pretty much. I mean,
well, I don't know. Well, I don't think it's understood, but I gather there is a fair amount of evidence now that microtubules are involved in this. So it's
great for Stuart. It's a vindicator after so.
Yes, yes.
and both of you, of course. Well, excellent. We will follow your progress as things progress. And what's your time frame? How does it start?
I mean,
what do you do?
Well, we hope to be up and running to some extent in the next month or so.
Oh.
So, yeah, with luck and following
Roger,
wind.
Does this mean you spend your winters in somewhere a bit warmer and sunnier?
I don't know what it means.
Oxford, you don't know.
I undoubtedly, would travel here. I mean, from time to time, or from longer than that, or what? I don't know at the moment. Okay. I'm waiting to see what happens.
Right, okay.
But clearly, I would want to be involved in what's going on. So,
very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, James.
Hello, my name is Dorian Electra, and welcome to the Science of Consciousness Conference poster session here at the beautiful Hyatt Hotel. Let's take a look and see what these beautiful minds have to show us. Come on. Hey, what's your name?
Maribel.
Great to meet you. And I gather that you're from Brazil also?
Yes.
Excellent.
In Brazil, we are making different things. We think that we need to improve the study about consciousness in the universities, because all the human being needs to study about consciousness. We need to change the situation in our society. Nowadays, we are living with a lot of corruption, violence, terrorism, and you need to change this reality. In the planet, we are with many people with depression, suiciding, and we need to change completely this situation, but we need to study about consciousness. That's the reason that we create conscientiology as an academic subject in the universities.
So this is actually in practice in the universities in Brazil. Which universities?
14, you can see here, 14 universities in 37 graduate and post-graduation course, and we made this study with 1,408 students in Brazil.
Wow, that's really remarkable. How long has this been going on?
And then we can see some results. After the study of consciousness, the principal subject is the life. They study about the life. And after the study, we can see that is it possible make integration in individual, familiar, education, political area dimensions. If we study about the life, if we study about self-knowledge, self-realization, we can improve ourselves to be better as a human being with itself, with the society, with the planet, with the universe, because we can see that we need amplify our perception about what we need to do to improve ourselves, to improve the society, the planet, the universe.
Amazing. I'm about to try one of these grounded well-being chairs that I've heard so much about. Let's see how it goes. All right, let's see if I can figure it out. Well, folks, this is a good life. I'm gonna just meditate here and figure out a way to get out of this chair.
From Indiana University. This is Greg Daw from University of California, San Diego. And we're showing the Vibe, and we're showing an artwork called Figuratively Speaking, and it's a virtual reality art piece that is all about stream of consciousness, and I'm really interested in making a rhetoric around virtual reality that is art-based rather than cinema or video game based, and so in order to expand the language around virtual reality, we're showing virtual reality art tonight.
Can't wait to experience it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's cool.
Now, are you moving around?
Yes, I am.
Oh, that's awesome! So if you actually turn your body, you can actually turn your head and go into a direction that you want.
Oh my gosh! Whoa!
She can't hear us anymore because she has headphones on, and so she's completely immersed, her eyes and her ears and her body, as you can see her moving around the environment. It's completely immersed in virtual reality.
Oh my gosh, wow, this is cool! I feel like I'm gonna have a dream about this tonight. I like these little chocolate-looking things. Wow, I love the hearts too. I'm never want to leave. Thank you so much. I really recommend that you try it.
So I'd like to welcome to Consciousness Central Elaine Chu. Elaine is at Queen Mary at the University of London. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, that's right.
And you're here in San Diego to talk about music and what we can perhaps learn about consciousness through the study of music and neuroscience. So can you expand on that for me and tell me a bit more?
Well, I'm here to talk about some of my work in relation to consciousness. And my work has to do with trying to decompose and explain the thinking behind music making and what musicians do when we make music, and also what listeners do when we listen to music. So the processing of the music in the mind, the conceptualization of music structures, how do we come to an understanding of music. So that's the basis of all the work that I do. So there was a quick introduction to some of these ideas as well as ongoing projects.
And I should add, you are a musician yourself?
Yes, I'm a pianist.
So let's just try and understand. Music is a very interesting area in our experience because we love it, but it's just a lot of sound in a way, but something gives us pleasure. Can you kind of deconstruct and define why music? Why do we like music? Why do humans do this?
I know why I like music, but I don't know why you like music.
Why do you like music? Let's see if it matches.
I like music because there's many abstract ideas encapsulated in music, and it's like a microcosm of the world. And it's a playground where you can play around with music structures and build complicated structures and communicate these structures to people. And so it's an abstract, well, in a way, language, but it doesn't designate things. It doesn't point to actual objects. It's a way of it carries these beautiful ideas to people, and it moves them and makes them happy, and that's, we all like to do things that make people happy.
So there's something inherent in music, in this sound, harmonic structure, form, that activates some sort of pleasure reaction in us.
Yes.
We just love to experience this this sort of variety and modulated sound, different tones and tunes, melodies, harmonies, things like this.
Yes.
Does your work look at what's going on in the brain regarding that? Is that where you're going?
No, we actually don't do brain imaging. At least we haven't done that yet. Okay. We look at what we know about music perception as it's conceptualized. So, if we perceive what is a thing in music, what are boundaries, when do events occur, and what kinds of expectations we have after listening to some bits of music, and when those expectations are fulfilled, the pleasure we get from it, or just anticipation of events that are about to come. So it's the experience of music that we're trying to capture.
So can you tell me, perhaps in a little more detail, how do you actually make an experiment? What happens?
Well, sometimes we make experiments, but people's response to music are so different because of our experiences, our own personal preferences, and so a lot of it has to do with looking at, well, an example of an experiment might be looking at where people differ in their interpretations of music, or looking at two performances of music, two interpretations, where they are different and why, right? So if one interpretation shows certain structures and another one shows a different set of structures, there are different choices, and that someone has gone to the trouble of coming up with two different solutions for the same set of notes, and so we can look at what options there are, what choices have been made, and and the results that they give and what people perceive. Did people perceive, do different people perceive the same structures in the same recording or or performance? And if they don't, why? Were they paying attention to different things? Maybe you were paying attention to timbre, I was paying attention to the rhythm, and therefore we heard different things.
So obviously these things can have, like rhythm can have a very different, we have a different response to rhythm, shall we say,
yes,
than to timbre or perhaps melody and things like that. What are you learning from this?
What are we learning? That's a deep question. There's
Just
so
go
much
somewhere
to
along
learn.
the path. So much to learn.
There's so much to learn. And what are we learning from this? I think we're learning the many different ways in which the same sounds can make sense to people. And in a way, how we make sense of the world is similar, right? The very same stimuli, when we experience the same situations, can lead to very different responses in different people. And so how do we come up with these different ways of responding to the same stimuli? It's us trying to make sense of the sensory input and what it means. So I think it just shows the wonderful variety in which the mind works.
Can we say there are, in form, musical form, what would you say are the archetypes? Or would you say, are there archetypes that
there are archetypes.
Yes, and you can identify them.
Yes, there are archetypes, and in the music textbooks, name a few archetypes, like sonata form and rondo form and things like that. But I think more basic than that, there are ideas of, those are already fairly high-level ideas and have been highly processed by intelligent minds, but they suit certain classes of music. But if we go back a few steps and go to a more fundamental level, basically, creating music is about modulating change and stability and variation so that it engages the listener and keeps them interested and gives them pleasure. And so there are more fundamental ideas of modulating these changes. Creating and composing music is about doing that so that eventually you architect larger forms. And sometimes not. So, the forms are important, but sometimes in other ways, like art, you defy the forms and you do something completely different. But the fundamental ideas of having that variation and change and non-change is still there, even in the music that doesn't adhere to the forms.
Exactly. In art, it tends to be you have to have your form and archetype first, and you can kind of bounce off it.
Right.
And you reveal something about that by defying the form. But ultimately, if you want to write a nice piece of music or write a good story, you're probably going to go back to this.
You might, yes.
You probably
will. Depends if you're an avant-garde artist.
That's true. But they're always in response to something else. It's they never, no matter how they try. I know in film, all the filmmakers who try to sort of like get away from the 3-act structure, they always eventually kind of not many people go and see their films, just a few aficionados. So there's something that pleasure principle that you're talking about, and I think that the combination of repetition and variation, which seems to be inherent. That's the archetype, I think, isn't it?
As you're saying, absolutely.
And our brain loves that. We just want more of it.
Yes, we love having, if we like something, we want to hear it again.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Exactly. Until eventually we're bored.
Yes, that's right. You get habituated. You're like, oh, it doesn't do it for me anymore.
Oh, excellent. What fascinating work. Elaine, thank you so much for talking to us this afternoon.
Well,
good luck with it. I hope we see you again and follow what you're doing there. With this fascinating research.
Great. Thank you for having me. So my name's Elaine Chu. I'm your pianist for this evening. And I'm from London, where I teach at Queen Mary, University of London, at the Centre for Digital Music. And I'm going to play you a couple sets of pieces The first set, if you were at my talk, I talked about a computer program called Morpheus that would compose music based on template pieces. So it would copy the repetition patterns and the tonal tension profiles of existing template pieces, and it's optimized to, as closely as possible, follow those with random notes that are iterated and changed until they fit as well as possible those profiles.
So we now come to the end of what has been a pretty impressive week here at Science of Consciousness Conference. Cameron's been sitting in on the last round of plenaries. Cameron, did we go out with a bang or a whimper?
We went out absolutely with a bang. So probably 2 or 3 of the best talks that I've heard since I've been doing the show with you came actually just today.
That's a bang.
Yeah, really. So first one was Lakmir Chawla, who's an intensive care unit physician at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Washington, D.C. And he, like all interesting discoveries, it started with a practical problem for him. What they found is about 1/10% of all the people that get anesthesia are actually awake while they're under anesthesia, and it's a major problem for like malpractice lawsuits. So what they did was they hooked up an EEG monitor that measures electrical activity in the brain to the patients under anesthesia, so that way they could know really quickly if they were still awake and then stop the surgery and prevent the lawsuits. So then what they found, though, is that in palliative care, so like end-of-life care, when they went and studied people, they would bring an EEG monitor into the end-of-life care just so that they could determine that the person was dying in a very dignified way. So you don't want them to be in pain. You want to be able to measure the activity of their brain so that you can make sure that they're comfortable when they're passing. So what they found was that when some of the patients died, there about 60 seconds, 1 to 2 minutes after their pulse had stopped and after their heartbeat had stopped, there was a surge of brain activity. And if you look at the EEG monitor, it's actually like more intense than when they're awake. And it lasts for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then it stops. And so they thought it might have been an artifact, and so they asked around. They found that actually repeatedly that it happens. And so then they figured, well, what's going on here? And they found that it happens in rodents. The same thing happens in rodents. In humans, about 1/2 of the people that they studied once they started studying this and getting permission from families to use the data, about half of the patients that had died were experiencing this after sort of end-of-life brain activity.
Wow.
So the question then is, how do you explain it? Is there some sort of evolutionary function, like maybe it's the brain trying to boot itself up one last time, give it one last shot? Maybe it's kind of like a seizure that happens, but they have reasons for thinking it's not like a seizure. It doesn't, the EEG monitoring doesn't look like a seizure. Maybe it's like the soul. Some people think, well, he's agnostic about what the sort of real story about it is. He's just saying this is a verifiable phenomenon. It's frequent, and the implications of it are significant for like medical ethics. So when a patient dies, they often harvest the organs of the patient, and they have to do it very quickly. Well, if it takes 2 to 3 minutes, in 2 minutes, if there's a surge of brain activity and you're not sure whether the patient is sort of fully passed or not, then do you start harvesting the organs immediately? And you really, in some cases, need to do that. So there's difficult questions for medical ethics that are the result of this one sort of scientific discovery. So that was it was an excellent, fascinating talk. Another one was Leon Chua, who is often said to be on like a short list for a Nobel Prize one day. He's an electrical engineer. He wrote a paper in the 1970s that, from an electrical engineer perspective, that said that there are three like basic circuit elements in electrical engineering: a resistor, a capacitor, and an inductor. And so all of electrical engineering is built on those sort of universal circuit elements. But he wrote a paper that said there's a fourth circuit element that ought to exist that hasn't been talked about and formalized mathematically. He called it a memristor because it can sort of remember the charge or the current that was just going through the element. So so he talked about the implications of this scientific discovery. And for example, and he talked about experiments in amoebas. And amoebas, you can sort of train them. They don't have brains. They're just a sort of clump of cells. But when they move through a tube, if you lower the temperature, they'll stop moving. And then if you raise the temperature again, they'll start moving. And then you can train them actually to then expect the temperature to go down, and they'll stop, even though the temperature hasn't gone down. And so they're learning, they're somehow learning, and yet they don't have a brain. And he thinks that it's something in the cells that are like these little memristors that remember the behavior prior and then anticipate it in the future, and then they can just turn it on and turn it off. So he's thinking that all of biology is full, the brain is sort of full of memristors, and then they might be able to use that to build brain-like computers. So he has a partner that works at HP, the computer company, and they spend a lot of money trying to build basically like flash drives that are made out of materials that are sort of memristive. So talked about the future of computing. And then the third lecture was V.S. Ramachandran, who's one of the great neuroscientists and great science communicators. He talked about the history of his research on phantom limbs and mirror neurons, and then some of his current research. He famously found that patients that have had amputated limbs but have a phantom limb that's in pain, that you can use a mirror, like a $2 mirror, and you can let the patient interact with the mirror and try to move their limbs around. And just when you look at a mirror, if you move your right arm, it looks like the left arm of the mirror, the person in the mirror is moving. So if you're a patient that has an amputated limb, but you have one good limb left, you can move that limb in the mirror, and it will look like your phantom limb is moving when you look in the mirror. So they find that when you do exercises with these things, your limb actually starts to feel better, and it feels like it's getting stretched. And so patients have reduced pain. They don't need to be on morphine anymore, and it's a $2 cure. It's really fascinating. So he did the same thing with by studying mirror neurons in the brain, which sort of fire when you're observing someone else doing a behavior. And he found that, for example, if a person with an amputated limb, his wife can stroke her arm, and the patient will feel like his arm is being massaged, his phantom limb is being massaged, and it reduces pain. A very simple thing that just has these amazing health benefits. So it's a kind of mind-body medicine thing. Then the final thing that he talked about was how apparently 2% of people that break a bone and then get the bone reset, their inflammation doesn't go away for some reason. So their hand, for example, will keep getting more and more inflamed, and it's a significant problem. He found that by using mirrors once again, that you can get the patients to feel instant relief because they feel that the pressure has been relieved on their limb, even though they're looking at a different limb. So he talked about virtual reality as a way of doing this kind of mind-body medicine in the future. Just a very fascinating talk. And then finally we had Bruce Damer. Bruce Damer is a very interesting sort of visionary scientist. He works for NASA, and he's a professor at UC Santa Cruz. And he talked about his lifelong quest for the origins of life. And what he found was in Australia, in a little hot spring, they searched and they found evidence. The oldest evidence of of life on the planet Earth, 3.6 billion years old, inside a hot spring bed. And it's little things called stromatolites, I believe was the name for it. And they're these little single-celled organisms that they want to get sunlight, and so they'll pick up a little piece of sand and use it like a hill to step on top of, and then it gets them closer to the sunlight. So they just keep doing that millions and millions of times, and then they form these little indentations in the iron soil, and then they went and found this. So not only did he talk about his discovery of these rocks, but he talked about his work for NASA and the origins of life, the evolution of inorganic material into biological life. And they've found, apparently, that you can create from inorganic materials in a laboratory RNA molecules, which are the building blocks of proteins, and so they're sort of spreading through the scientific community right now, circulating these discoveries that they've made. It'll be in Scientific American magazine in a couple months. So his presentation just gave a very comprehensive view of the origins of life, but how it also fits into a kind of cosmic story about the future of humanity, and that eventually the sun is going to get very hot and there's only so much time left for us on the planet Earth, and so we need to start thinking about capturing asteroids and building sort of biomes and using this knowledge to sort of seed life in the outer solar system. So very kind of far out stuff today, but also really interesting stuff.
Wow, that's amazing. It sounds as if we've had this week, from your reports, just an incredible array of so many diverse approaches to consciousness. It seems as if when you bring all those things together, the picture that we get is so rich and varied, and yet we're really talking about this one thing. When you had a really busy week, is there anything that you have as a take-home, something special that really kind of stood out for you?
Well, I mean, what stands out for me for the most part is just being here, communicating with all the people, talking with the presenters and the people that give the concurrent talks when we're sitting at lunch or after everything's all over and everybody's having a beer afterward and listening to Dorian Electra and all the rest of it. And just being able to talk for hours with such a wide range of people, and the random sort of interactions that I have with these presenters turn out to become sort of thoughtful things that I can take home with me, and friendships. And so I guess my take-home message is that everybody that's out there should come here next year. Yeah.
Absolutely agree with that. I'd just like to say thank you for your fine efforts this week. Once again, you did us proud with your summaries. We still don't know quite how you do it. One of these days we'll need a neuroscientist to wire you up, because I don't know anybody who can deliver 7 to 10 minutes of pretty much straight, coherent reporting like you. Most journalists on television can't even do that. So
thank you.
Thank you, man. And I hopefully will see you for the Science of Consciousness Conference and Consciousness Central 2018. We'll be back in Tucson. Cameron Keyes, thanks, man.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who's next over here? Did I see Graham's hand up? All right, Graham from New Zealand, here he comes. Back for a repeat performance.
This one I wrote about 15 minutes ago, and it's the first time it's been read. Been there, done that, but when? Now or never? Then or forever? Here I am, or there I am. Being with you, this is true. Love me as I love you. Entangled minds through time and space, the distance or date does not negate. For we are free to travel and be whenever or wherever without certainty. For it is doubt and space that allows us to relate. No goodness into being, and it is love we will be seeing. I see you, you see me, and we know love. Thank you.
Yeah. Whoosh! What was that? That, John,
was your life. My life? Yes, and your script too. Never mind the script. What's this about my life? Well, it's nearly over, isn't it? Done. Finished. Finito. Kaput. Dead parrot. What? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you knew. Grey beard, white hair, wrinkly skin. Wrinkly skin? Yes, the things that go with the aging process before you die. Stop it! Well, you started it. I started it? Yes, you started it when you asked what the whoosh was. Oh, so what's next? Oblivion? Maybe. Maybe. There's hope. Well, maybe. Maybe memories of you in other people will unite when they talk about you, and in some way you will be resurrected in their thoughts and live again, if only in fragments. But that's not like real what? Real consciousness? Real life? How real do you think your consciousness is now? What if it were affected by dementia, depression, schizophrenia, taking LSD? You don't take LSD, do you? Oh, no, of course not. Well, there you are. This is what lies ahead. Oh, so that's it then. Yeah. Bye, John. Wait. Will it hurt? Honestly? I don't know. Will I be alone? No, you'll have me. The voice that listens when you talk to yourself. Well, that's all right then. I'm ready. Time to die. That's it.
My name is Melanie. The name of my poem is I Am. I am subliminal white flashes crossing streets, intoxicating folks with truths that only exist in fairy tales, causing them to hang themselves, slit their wrists, gash their throats, crack their skulls, leaving them no choice but to jump to their death. I saw nothing in them, wrapped in the sweet, false escape of heaven, where there are no imperfections, only there swearing, quarreling, drinking. A sweet, desecrated chariot, held like a crucifix on a dead hand, rests on the embers of fire. Such a monster is not encountered in private life. I shall flail in the hot time like fire caressing the page. I am amazed like a prison where werewolves watching my Peter Pan shadow chases me, where air bites shrewdly from within the deep dark pit of my flesh. My time in hell, equipped only with the smooth silk touch of my burning skin. Sirens in my ears, merely an expansion of my imagination. Storms of a lifetime of lies fill the air. A single spark can start a prairie fire. Burn, forever burn, sit in the ashes, profane fumes. I am a flickering candle, burnt to a crisp, spark searing my face, entering my lungs. To live is to die in this purple twilight. For I have nowhere to go except back to myself. I have no one to be but me. For I am you, and you are me. And together, we are one. So tell me, how can we run from anyone? I am.
Uplifting. Wow, fantastic.
And so sadly we come to the end of our final day's programming here at the Science of Consciousness Conference 2017. I'd like to thank you for joining us this week for Consciousness Central. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to everybody who's been involved behind the scenes, including, well, actually not behind the scenes, Cameron Keyes of course was on camera, Dorian Electra, who kept us amply entertained, and then our crew. the fine Sasha Seifert over in Stuttgart doing international coordination. We've got Jason Canfield, our set director, and our roving cameraman right behind this very camera, Philip Safarik. So thank you to you guys. I want to thank Stuart Hammeroff for his support of this program. He's obviously executive director of the Center for Consciousness Studies in Tucson and the conference founder, and Abby Behar Montefiore, our very able, long-suffering superstar conference director. I'm Nick Day. Thank you once again for joining us. Join us next year in Tucson for more editions of Consciousness Central 2018. Bye for now.